Hi, everybody. Welcome to Toolkits Live, Community URL and IRL with Cecile Richard. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that I'm broadcasting to and from stolen lands. Currently, I'm broadcasting from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people tuning in tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and that though we meet in cyberspace right now, the computers, servers, and fiber optic cables used to route this to you tonight occupy physical space on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land. This Toolkits live session comes to you from Express Media, an organisation that supports young Australian writers and editors aged 12 to 30. For over 30 years, Express Media has been developing, supporting, and promoting young writers through workshops that develop skills, through opportunities for constructive feedback and publication, and through awards and programs that recognise excellence. Toolkits is an online development program run by Express Media for writers aged 30 and under. Each program includes one-on-one mentoring and feedback from an established writer, specialised presentations like this one from guest artists, and the opportunity to network with other young people working in the same literary form. Toolkits is made possible through the generous support of the Copyright Agency Cultural Fund. The digital storytelling stream of Toolkits, which is this stream, aims to teach the forms, skills, and ethics of creating stories for the web and beyond. It's facilitated by me, Rory Green. I'm a writer and a digital media artist who is also currently an online editor for VoiceWorks, which is a publication run by Express Media for young Australian writers and editors under 25. Our special guest tonight is Cecile Richard. Cecile is a graphic designer, illustrator, zine maker, and game designer living in Melbourne, whose artistic work often revolves around the themes of memory, connection, and belonging. The most well-known works include award-winning short Bitsy games Navina and Endless Scroll, and the recently released Under a Star Called Sun. In this live session titled Community, URL and IRL, we're going to be talking about the dynamics of collaboration and co-creation, the processes of communities of practice around digital tools and forms, and explore how to get involved, contribute to, or grow your own storytelling communities. That's my intro spiel over. Hey, Cecile.
Hello.
How are you going?
Pretty good. I was a little bit nervous about this, but I think it's going to be good.
It's going to be amazing. Do you want to, maybe your best place to start would be to tell everybody about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah. So I'm Cecile, and so I kind of do a lot of things in life. My primary job is graphic designer, but lately I've been doing a lot of game making and writing and making art for that as well. And yeah, I've been kind of making games since 2018-ish, and a lot of it is very short experiences that are quite personal and kind of deal with usually recurring themes of connection, memory, and belonging, and the internet and other things. And that's what I've been doing, and I don't even know what to say about it, because it's I feel like I've been.
That's a great intro.
Yeah, it's just been on lockdown for 6 months, so I'm I don't know, nothing new to say about anything.
What have I got to say? Who am I? Where is this? What year is? Where are we?
I don't remember any of this. But also I've actually released a new game. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday.
Yes. Yeah.
Days of the week.
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah. I think we'll touch on this actually later, because it's a little bit related to community stuff, but it's actually a collaboration with a local band from Melbourne, also Cable Ties, where they provided the music and also have been part of the process of making the game. And the game's called Hope, and it's out on itch. And yeah, it's kind of a musical experience about learning to relying on people, and and fighting against hopelessness, which I think is something that we need these days. And hopefully that's something that brings people a little bit of joy in these weird times.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to talk more about that a bit later. I wanted to ask, how many Bitsy games is that, like, with that one released? And
I'm gonna look it up.
You have to look it up.
Yeah.
While you're looking it up, do you want to maybe introduce like what Bitsy is and what you use it for?
Yes, I can. So Bitsy is this tiny game editor that you can just kind of play around with in your browser, and I think like it's a very nice and like beginner friendly way of making little games or little worlds, or like places that you can kind of like hang out, talk to characters with, craft some little stories. Usually it's going to be short form, like the kind of tool that you can use without much pressure and just to have fun and discover or rediscover, what it's like to kind of create something for fun. I feel like so many people, like especially if you're a creative, like you kind of tend to get a little bit burnt out on things. And I think like Bitsy is a nice way to kind of like put things into perspective and also kind of like try something new. So like if you haven't yet, I strongly recommend anyone to use Bitsy to make games with that. I don't know what else I should add.
I think what's really interesting about Bitsy is that there is such like an extensive online community for making games with Bitsy, like on Twitter and the Discord channel, and people sharing their games and running game jams on the itch.io platform. Can you tell me about like when you started using Bitsy, and do you remember when, like, how you found out about it?
I remember very clearly. By the way, the answer to that question about how many, I think it's like 6 or 7. So that's cool. Pretty good. Yeah. Kind of depends on like what you like include in the canon of my works. Okay, so early beginnings of me and Bitsy. I very clearly remember being introduced to Bitsy by my friend and fellow Bitsy creator. Their name is Mark Wonacott, also known as Candle. Shout out to Candle. And I think like, so they made like a few games in Bitsy and I tried it out. I was like, ooh, these are cool. Like, these are cool. Like they have like, they had this like aesthetic and atmosphere, and I was really, really intrigued with that. And I was like, oh, what is this? And then I like looked at the editor and I was like, oh wow, okay, this is the kind of thing that me as like someone who's a complete like beginner when it comes to coding and stuff like that, I was like, I can probably make something with this. And this would have been 2017, like late 2017. And then I didn't make a game.
You made a game?
No, I didn't make a game after that. And then I didn't make a game until like 6 months later or something. Like, right. I think like I had like some ideas and I was like, yeah. Like, I think I started out like with a too complicated idea. And that's why I was like, oh, okay, I'll hold off on that and just like try to think of, if I think of something good, then I'll come back to this this tool. And I didn't think about it for 6 months. And then I had this idea, and like there was like this Bitsy jam going on, organized by the community, and the theme was ocean, and I was like, yeah, I like that theme. I like the ocean, and I decided to make a game about it, write a poem, make some art, and that was Novena, and that was the beginning of the adventure for me.
That's so cool. Can you briefly explain to maybe the people in who are listening who don't know what a jam is, and what it was like doing your first jam?
So like a jam is like, think of like band practice, or not, but like it's this usually weekend long, week long, sometimes months long, event or period where you kind of get given a theme and you either team up with people or you do it alone, but you kind of try to create a small scope game that works within the theme that is given, or not. You can do whatever you want. It's that kind of like thing to kind of challenge yourself in terms of game making, or like even just to give yourself an excuse to create something. And the Bitsy jams are monthly. They happen every month, and they are organized by the community of Bitsy, which we will talk about later. And people just vote on a theme every month, and then they can take part in it or not. And I think I would say that playing the games that people make, even if you didn't make one yourself, that contributes also. I think there's so many really good work that just keeps getting released every month, that I think it's very good to keep an eye on this stuff. And yeah, so that's what a jam is. It's this short-term, fun little make something fest.
It's really cool to hear you mention the people who kind of observe and lurk in spaces like a jam as valued kind of members of that online community, that kind of pops up around jams.
Yeah, even so the Bitsy community has this Discord, and Discord is this platform where you can just it's kind of like a forum, but weirder, or just kind of more millennial, maybe. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, it's this place where people talk about things, and we also call it the Bitscord. And yeah, there's there's a lot of lurkers on the Bitscord, and I think they are allowed and they are valid. I think there's a lot of value in just sitting and looking at what people do and kind of absorbing it, and just join in the talking and stuff and the sharing and stuff whenever you feel ready. And I think there's no pressure in that.
What do you think it was about the jam, the ocean jam, that kind of was different to trying to make a game on your own, or for its own sake?
I think I'm trying to think. I'm the kind of person who likes having a deadline when working on something. So I feel having that okay, I got to make something now or else, that kind of sense of urgency is definitely what kind of kicked my butt into making an actual game instead of thinking about it for ages. So part of it is that. Part of it is definitely related to my own work process, ethic, whatever. And the other part of it is that the theme in particular, the ocean theme, was something that spoke to me. I had wanted to make work involving the symbolism and aspect of the ocean for a long time, actually. I think I wanted to make a comic about it, and I was no. And then I wanted to write about it. I was no. And then I made a game, and I was oh, this is it. This is the medium. And I think that's what worked for me anyway. Having that oh, okay, so this is my chance to try this out and see what happens.
That's so cool. It's nice. It's such a wow moment to have an idea and be kind of trying it out in different forms or different media, and then having that place where it clicks and you're oh yes, this is what it's supposed to be. I can see it now.
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly,
No, I was just thinking about how game making kind of came into my life at a moment where I kind of felt very frustrated by my skills in illustration and stuff like that, where I was I want to try something else. And that's when it really kind of kicked in, that desire to create something that, was not frustrating to me. I don't really draw as much anymore. Like if you don't count pixel art, that is. So like that's kind of was my shift into like game making rather than illustration.
That's
Yeah.
cool. I'm keen to like remind you in like a couple minutes to
Yeah.
get back to that idea of like sort of exploring a new media and like the skills associated with that. I just wanted to quickly plug the VoiceWorks online digital writing jam, which is running. It starts this Saturday. It will go for 9 days. And if people watching are who are watching this live, I guess, are interested in making digital writing or art, whether it's with Bitsy or something like Twine or Tracery or Flick Game or whatever. I encourage you to sign up. It's free to sign up. Anybody can sign up. And you'll basically get invited to a private Discord server where we're going to be posting creative prompts and resources for making cool digital stuff. So if you haven't had that experience before and are interested, absolutely sign up. I'm so excited for it because it's actually going to be the first jam I participated in.
Yay! That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm like.
Yeah, I'm also interested in joining up, even though I'm very busy. I'm like, maybe I should.
I think so I'm actually also using the not just excited to be involved in sharing cool things that I've found, like resources or examples of work that I think is really interesting, but I'm also like actively planning to make something for it. But I am making something that's kind of ties into like a commission that I have. So if you've got like lots on, Cecile, and you can you're like, I'll just you can just come onto the Discord and be like, I have this thing due in like 8 days, and like I have to send it. Like, what do I do?
I need help. Yeah, I could do that. I could actually shoehorn my current project into this. I could do that, sure.
What was it like when you started making games? Like, did it come like easily to you, or did you hit like barriers? Like, and how did like the kind of Bitsy community that you have been talking about, like the people participating in the jam and the Bitscord, like come into play there?
I think I think it would be a lie to say that Novena is my first foray into making games, like, because really, like, when I discovered Bitsy would be the first try, and then that didn't work. I mean, it didn't work in the sense that at the time I didn't make anything then, but I kind of like familiarized myself with the tool, and I was like, okay, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do right now. And actually, the first project that I was trying to make, like in 2017, was the idea that became Endless Scroll.
Right.
Yeah,
so
right. It's like mind blown. Like, no, but it really is that I had this idea. Oh, I want to make this game about like being on Facebook and stuff like that. And then I was like, but actually, I don't have the technical skills for that right now. So I put it aside and didn't think about it for like 3 years or 2 years, whatever. And yeah, that's how things come back to me. And like in that sense, also when I made Novena, I think like I already had these existing ideas, and it was quite easy to make the game because I already had these established like ideas and concept that I wanted to explore. And it was relatively easy also because I didn't make it hard for myself. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna make something with the tool vanilla, like basically only using the editor, no hacks, no nothing, just that and some music and whatever. And like I basically kept it really simple. And I think that is what made it easy for me to not only start the work but also finish it. I feel like if you overcomplicate things on your first try, chances are it's not gonna, like, you're not gonna be happy with it, or it's gonna, like, there's always like something that comes up. So like I feel like keeping it simple in the first place is it's good, and then you can gradually make it more complicated. And I think that's what I've been doing.
I really like that. I mentioned to the other in one of the Toolkits programs a few weeks ago, this quote from Ira Glass's podcast. He talks about like a gap between the things that you're making and your taste in stuff, and you can have really good taste, but the stuff you're making doesn't match it, and like you have to like get to, you have to overcome that sort of disappointment or kind of frustration around like, oh, why doesn't my thing, or like that Simpsons episode where like Homer's got the like picture of the like barbecue on the box, and he's like, why doesn't mine look like that?
It's like a pile of things. Yeah, no, totally. I think it definitely is the kind of thing where you have to take the L, and I feel like actually, like simple tools like Bitsy that only give us like the bare minimum things, that actually helps with like getting level with your taste and skills. Like I think it's like, well, if you only have, I mean, this is not a good analogy, but like if you only have a pen and paper, you're not going to make like a watercolor illustration, right? Like, so it kind of is like, okay, I'm going to like stay on this basic level, and then once I have this down, I can graduate to more complicated things. Like, and that's and that's what I've been doing, really. I feel like, so I released Nirvana, and then ever since then, each time I make a game, I add a new hack, a new element that is new to me. Like, and I learn about that, and I think that's been really, really helpful for me, getting confidence in what I do, and also like, it's just fun. I think it's more fun than like trying to shoot for the stars and going into a black hole.
Can you talk about the hacks that you just mentioned, and like kind of what you're referring to there, and how you say you learn about them, like whereabouts do you go for that?
So hacks, they are I'm not hacking anything. I am actually using tools made by other people in the community. So hacks are like these things that you can add to the code, like your game's code in Bitsy, and they're usually made by like community members, just to make either things easier or look better aesthetically, or they do specific thing like add some choices in your dialogue, or add some colors, or like these kind of like very simple, but sometimes things that you wish that the vanilla or like simple editor had, that you're like, oh, I wish this had this, and then like someone in the community came up with a way to add that, and I think like that sort of stuff has been really there are some people who only use like vanilla Bitsy and they're okay with that, and I think that's really good. And then like there's like the rest of us who are like constantly like being like, oh, okay, I'm gonna use all this, and like it's a really nice way of like sharing skills in a way that is not like, it's not a lot of pressure. It's just like, oh, okay, and then like a lot of like my experience with it also is that like I'll try it, and if it doesn't work, I just like go into the Discord and I'm like, hey, I'm having trouble with this hack. Can someone help me, please? And then someone will help me, and it's really lovely. And so like hacks are very much like a big part of the community of Bitsy, where people will like help each other make things that are not more interesting, but more elaborate and more like complicated and to the standards of what you want to make, like, or like, all the features that you
pushing new frontiers,
pushing your boundaries and stuff like that, and a lot of that comes from sharing knowledge and asking for help, and that sort of stuff, and that's such a huge it's a huge part of my experience with the community. So I love the hacks. That's
so cool. So you've mentioned that you get help with hacks on the Bitsy Discord. Do you use it for other things? Like what sorts of sort of interactions and conversations happen on the Discord?
There's like So like strictly in terms of like creating stuff, I also share like screenshots of what I'm working on just for fun, just to be like, hey, this is what I'm working on, and also seeing other people's process stuff, and like maybe they'll go in more depth about like if it's something complicated, they'll be like, oh yeah, I did this by doing this, and like I feel like there's a lot of that. And I also really like seeing what people are up to and discovering new interesting work. And there's also, you can also share like finished games. So like you can be like, hey, can you play my game, please? And a lot of that happens. And like I discover a lot of really good games through that. Like not only through that, but also like through there's going to be, whenever there's a jam or whatever, you're going to have a page with all the jam entries on each, and that's also like a really good way of like by theme discovering new work by people, or like following people you like's work, that sort of stuff. So there's that aspect of like creating together, or like sharing what you're creating, and then there's like the fun part of the fun part, the like the like kind of casual conversation, socializing part of the Discord that is a lot more like maybe fast paced, and people will be cracking jokes and sharing memes, and like the usual that you would do on Discord. And that's also fun. I admittedly don't spend as much time in there as I would if I had all the unlimited free time, but I still do contribute somewhat, hopefully, to that part of the community as well, and that's been fun. I feel like just like catching up with the latest in joke is fun, and being like, oh, okay, this is what people are talking about, and like being like, okay, I get it now. And yeah, there's also my friend Candle and other people in the community also like organize these like fun little like parties in another like virtual space that is like, I think it's built in Bitsy, but it's like this like online space where you can just kind of hang out, and it's called The Zone, and it's like unaffiliated with the Free Play Zone, but there's a link there.
Cool. We'll talk about that soon.
Yeah, we will. And people watch like movies or like music videos, listen to stuff, and that's where a lot of like socializing also happens. It's kind of outside of my time zone stuff, because a lot of people on the Discord are from the UK. So it happens in like nighttime UK time, and that's like I'm asleep. But when I am awake at 3 a.m. on Wednesdays, I'm like, hello.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. So there's like some of that, and so I feel like the community, the Bitsy community is pretty well established in the sense that like there's a lot of people who just interact with each other and know each other in a sense, but it's never like cliquey. I don't think it is. You can just kind of participate in that sort of stuff without people being like, who are you? Like people are like really welcoming, and I think that's a huge plus for the Bitsy community. I think like I'm not going to shade other communities, but some other communities of game makers, they are quite they are quite hostile to new people. So like I feel like having a place where you can be new and not be ostracized for it is usually a good thing. I feel like it is quite encouraging most of the time to not be disrespected just because you're new. Imagine.
So important for like people who are starting out with something that they're not familiar with to not feel like they're, I don't know, inconveniencing somebody with their like lack of knowledge, or it's like a kind of, this is an interesting segue into what I wanted to talk to you about now, which is other events or communities that you've been involved with, maybe not connected to Bitsy, but not explicitly that Bitcord. And the analogy I draw to that Bitcord community, particularly that way of approaching or welcoming newcomers, is the National Young Writers Festival, which is a huge annual writers festival in Newcastle for young writers in Australia, and that's was really important to me as a emerging writer. Like a few years ago when I kind of first started becoming involved in what might be sort of Australia's broader literary scene. Can you tell us about your experience with National Young Writers Festival or some of the other events that you've been part of?
Yeah. So National Young Writers Festival is one of the first, I guess, like events that I interacted with after moving to Australia. So like that was like, it definitely was a little bit of a new experience for me, and I was not considering myself as much as a writer as at that moment, where I was like, I had like one game released and it had like some words in it, and that was like the extent of like my writing. But like the event itself still felt very cozy and welcoming, and like with a lot of like-minded people, like across fields, like I think so. Like me and my partner and the director of Free Play, which is a games festival here in Melbourne, independent games festival. So like we were invited, as some kind of like little exchange project with the NYWF, and like, so I was there to mainly conduct a workshop to teach people how to use Bitsy, and that was like my first interaction with writers. And that was good. Honestly, it was so good. It was really good to like introduce like people who don't make games to game making accessible, and like, because I feel like so much of like the most interesting work that I see is made by people who don't work in games. Yeah. Maybe controversial, maybe not. But I do think that like it's always nice to have like inspirations and influences that come from different media than the one you're working with. I feel like this goes any kind of way. I feel like,
yeah.
Like as a graphic designer too, I'm just like, I really dislike graphic design that is like solely like it's obsessed with itself, like in a way that I'm just like, oh, that's boring. I don't care. I've seen this 10,000 times, like that sort of thing, where I'm just like, self-referencing is fine, but it's not the most interesting thing that I've ever seen in life. So, and I think like games are similar in the sense that you have a lot of games that kind of they have a lot of games that just talk about themselves, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. You're gonna remake Mario.
I think it's like there's a similar sort of thing in like my experience in kind of writing communities where I don't know, there's this weird sort of interplay where like you have writers who work in different forms like fiction or essays or poetry that are all quite different, but I love going to stuff like NYWF and other writers festivals to experience other, like to see people working in other forms and hear about how they work, because there's like connections that you can kind of draw on, ways of working or ways of doing things that like you wouldn't otherwise kind of think of if you were just in your kind of form. But at the same time, I remember like being asked to talk about poetry at Free Play Festival a few years ago, and thinking like, what, like poetry and games? What has that got to do? Like, even though there's that inside the writing community, there's that comfort of kind of blending different practices and people working in different forms, kind of like learning from one another. But as soon as it's kind of like not explicitly writing on a page, I guess, it feels so completely different, when in actual fact there's like so much for storytellers who work on short stories or fiction to learn from narrative designers who work on games. It's just, it's interesting. You sort of touched on at NWF you made you ran a Bitsy workshop.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was looking this week for Bitsy resources for the writing jam on the weekend, and your slides from that workshop are like the second highest tutorial on the Bitsy wiki. So the wiki page specifically for tutorials on and examples of Bitsy. If you are interested in starting, exploring Bitsy yourself, I think that's the best place to go. And yeah, I saw your slides. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool that like people in the community have recognized your kind of your knowledge contributions, I guess.
That's cool. Like, because I made those slides based on other people's work. So like, I like looked at like multiple like tutorials and basically like put them together. And those slides are quite out of date now because like there's new new features in Bitsy now. But that's funny. That's good.
It's interesting that let's kind of. Do you have any thoughts on that idea of like? I think this is very specific to digital work, is that you're working inside of technologies that are constantly evolving. And like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but for me, like I particularly trying different forms will be like working on something and be like, oh, I need to figure out how to do this. And then I go Google and like, it's like, here are some instructions, but this was for like version 1.2, like 8 years ago. Like you need to, we're on, if you're on version 4.1, you need to like reboot your computer and like go out to a field, and you're only allowed to like work on your game at like the full moon. Like, have you had that experience of like having to like relearn Bitsy or relearn aspects of the sort of making games?
Yeah, so like Bitsy is a little bit special, isn't it? Because like I think the Bitsy wiki is pretty good, well maintained, I'm pretty sure. But I feel like a lot of these like wikis and like documentation, they tend to be a little bit not badly maintained, but like you still have to like do the effort of updating them every time, and like some people like, so there's always going to be a little bit of a disconnect between like those resources and like what's actually available, right? So, which is why I think like the Discord in particular is like, because it's like this constantly evolving or like constant, like it's a living, like archive in a way, where when there's new changes, there's going to be people who already know, like this sort of stuff. So like, Googling stuff for Bitsy in particular, like Googling stuff is fine. I feel like I periodically like Google how to add a fourth color, because like I always forget how to do it. But like, aside from that stuff, I think it's always for better and for worse, like I think it's more helpful to ask on Discord and like, or even search on Discord, being like, oh, you can type out the like things that you're looking at, and that's always going to be like out, like up to date and like and like easier to get what you want, or like have someone respond, and I say for better or for worse, because for the better, because like I said, it's like this like constantly evolving thing, but also for worse because like Discord is this thing owned by a company, and like you don't know how long that's going to be there, and it's great, but it's not going to be there forever, clearly. So it's kind of like this, like, this kind of like gets into this other discussion of like, how do you archive things and how do you blah 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 and that sort of stuff. But overall, like I feel like Bitsy is quite good in terms of, maybe it is because it's still fairly new, that the knowledge is still concentrated in the sense that is easier to pass than things that are like really old. I think does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. And that's interesting, that kind of idea of Discord being like, this company, this proprietary platform, and it makes me think of the sort of like with Twitter bots and people using tools like Tracery to make Twitter bots, and it used to be like a really huge thing, and then over time, changes, Twitter has changed the API that lets people kind of, bots do various things, changed it so much that a lot of people who, like artists who are making creative bots on Twitter, are now like moving to stuff like Mastodon to host their bots alternatively. And it's interesting to see that, like online communities, even when they are around like a very specific thing, that it doesn't just take place in one space. It kind of folds out over different sorts of social media and like my experience with Bitsy, or I think, how I found out about Bitsy was through Twitter and people tweeting about the Bitsy Jam. It's interesting that's kind of, it's evolving spaces and stuff like that. Can you talk, can you tell me a bit about like other IRL communities that you've been involved with, that like, so you taught that Bitsy workshop at NYWF. Do you meet up in like Melbourne, say, with other Bitsy makers or even like game people?
So like in terms of Bitsy people, there's I wouldn't say there's not a lot of them in Melbourne. I just don't know them. That's the difference. Or like, I don't know. I feel like I know that I'm not the only one making Bitsy games in Melbourne, because that would be preposterous to say. But like I feel like maybe we are like kind of part of like this larger community of game devs in Melbourne. So I can talk about that. Obviously, not a lot of in real life meetings are happening right now in Melbourne.
It's
not allowed. If you do it, you're going to be fined, so you don't want to do that.
But pre-COVID,
pre-COVID, yes. Yeah, so like there was, like I mentioned, there is Free Play, which is an independent games festival. I think the longest running independent game festival in the world. So that's a really, it's kind of an important event for the Melbourne game dev community, especially people like me who make like stranger work, like maybe artsier work, like non-commercial. I feel like Free Play in particular has this very it does lots of really important work in terms of featuring and betting for more experimental work, or like works made by people who are not like veterans in game dev, and I think that's really good. And then you've got like the more industry oriented events like PAX and GCAP, and like all these conferences that are like important to in general, I think. But I feel like for the local, you could say, scene, you probably want to check out Free Play and Parallels, and like these events where people kind of meet up and chat and socialize and stuff. And and outside of that, sadly the bar has closed, but Bar SK was like a big meeting place for a lot of these. I say these creators as if I'm not part of them. So yeah, we just met in this cool bar in Collingwood that also like serves as like an artsy gallery for games and stuff, with a lot of like custom controllers, good beer, like that sort of stuff. And the bar closed right before COVID actually, and that kind of, not related to COVID, but I think that kind of brought about a lot of change, I think, in the community, and it's kind of going through this like transition and state where I don't know where it's going, and it's exciting to think about. I've been thinking about community a lot, so I'm like, oh, maybe I could organize some things. Maybe I could.
I was gonna ask, like, do you feel like, and this is like the same with the the Bitsy resources, and then also with, I guess, your the IRL community around games in Melbourne and Bar SK. Like, do you ever feel like a sort of responsibility towards like giving back to the community that you're involved in, or like shaping like what it's kind of, you know, what it does, what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So like speaking of like during COVID stuff, so like Free Play this year went fully online because obvious reasons. And a friend of mine, Jay, who lives in Sydney actually, and we teamed up to make this like virtual space where people could meet up and like watch streams of the festival together, or like, you know, talks and stuff together. And that turned out that was called the Free Play Zone, and that was turned out to be like something that people really needed, and like especially after like months of lockdown, and we and we just like really wanted to, you know, like we kind of all like miss each other, right? And it's this like very, it was this magical moment where a lot of people could finally find each other in the same space that isn't like a chat space, and it's more of like, and it's not a Zoom video call either. It's like it's a physical virtual place where you see you see yourself as a body in a place and you interact with others. So that's probably the closest you can go to like being somewhere, if that makes sense. And so like we made this for fun. Like we kind of like volunteered we pitched it to Chad, and we're like, hey, do you want to should we make this happen? And then we made it happen, and then people really liked it. Like that was really, really good. Like it felt like such a validating, in a way, thing that you can just go and organize something. You can go and create something, and people will show up because they just want to, you know, they just want to connect. And like, I mean, I'm fortunate because I already knew people in there, and that's why I'm able to do these things. So you know, I wouldn't say, you know, to someone who's just entering the community, like, oh yeah, you should totally like organize all these things that take a lot of effort. Like, just start anything. Nah, that's not realistic. I think it's more about like what you can do, and like that's basically what I'm saying, is that like I guess we can kind of segue this into like what, you know, like what newcomers and can do and stuff. But I think like even just like finding like-minded people, like people on the same level of like, you know, like proficiency skills and stuff as you, and maybe even like shared interests and stuff. Like I think a lot of people here in Melbourne in particular, you know, they go to uni, they go to the RMIT games course thingy, and that's where like a lot of the friendships are made, apparently. I didn't go to uni, I don't know. Apparently people make friends, but yeah, so like that's an option, I guess. But for people who don't, like, I think like it's possible to, I don't know, like just I hate this. I hate being like, just simply make friends, you know, like I think.
No, I think I know what you mean. And I think about like, because sometimes people ask me, it's happened actually a lot over the past couple of weeks with toolkits, people asking like, oh, I really want to make something that's kind of like this, or I like really like this particular writer or artist. Like, do you know of other work like that? And I hadn't even been aware of it, but I do have a lot of like, I was like, oh, well, this person, you know, does similar sort of things, or you might like this. And had a couple participants be like, oh, how do you know all these like niche work and stuff? And I think and I've been reflecting on that because I didn't even realize that it was like niche, but it's purely been like several years of going to events, whether it's like IRL stuff like NYWF, or being like watching live streams and or being involved on you know, Twitter and following other writers on Twitter, and working with people who, like you said, at my skill level at the time, and asking them about their work and sharing your work. And I've learned so much just by being like, hey, like, if you ever want me to, like, you know, if you ever want feedback on one of your poems or something, like one of your stories, let me know, because like I'm eager to learn more about that. And those kind of, I think it's those interpersonal connections that sort of they sort of amass into sort of, you know, smaller groups and eventually communities that can do stuff like you were saying, like organizing larger scale events, you know, around a community.
Yeah.
Is there anything you think people should avoid doing if they were like wanted to become involved in a Bitsy community, or if like maybe they are in a, you know, not working necessarily in Bitsy, but like working in making essays out of Microsoft Excel, like, and they want to start a community for that, like.
Yeah. These are probably kind of like more general, like almost life rules. So I'm gonna be like a grandpa.
Yeah, that's okay.
But like, you know, don't be rude, obviously. But also like, be patient. Like, you know, like I am someone who I get very envious of people. I guess I get very you know, I'm like, oh, I wish I had all these things that this person has, you know, or like I'll start like irrationally like being like jealous of someone, and I'm like, ah, and then like it's like, what am I doing? You know, like, I'm just like, this is so useless. I could simply just like, I feel like, so this is my theory, but like usually if you kind of dislike someone and you're like, but I don't know why, I just dislike them. Sometimes you just dislike someone because you dislike them. But what if the reason you dislike them was because they were too similar to you and you're a little bit jealous of that? And I'm like, and the advice to that, I would say, is like, just be friends with them. Just become friends with them, and then you have no reason to hate them. Like, and like, usually that means like, if you have the same problem as me, where I'm like, this person's too much like me, I hate them, you know, like, just be like friends with them, because that means you have things in common. Like, you know, like, maybe this is like a little dumb things to say, but like, I think it actually, honestly though, like, helped me a lot in the past few years to just kind of like get over like these like negative feelings of like feeling like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or like, you know, whatever, and just like, oh man, this person, you know, I have like, this person lives rent free in my head. What if I simply became friends with them? You know, that sort of stuff. And I feel like that's important. And like, you know, just kind of like examine your feelings and examine like who are the people you know, who are the people that you know, and who can you reach out to in a friendly way? Who can you make an effort to talk to? You know, like that sort of stuff. And like, and that's where I think like these meaningful maybe connections like begin, you know, like by you know, doing the effort of being like, okay, I'm gonna be this person's friends, I guess. You know, like that decision that you make is probably gonna pay off at some point. Even just like on a purely like self you know, bettering like purpose. But like I think that it's always a good thing to kind of like try to connect with people who are accessible to you, I think. And I think like it's no I'm gonna have to be careful with what I say, but like it's easy to be starstruck and like try to be friends with people who, or try to be friends or be too familiar with people who you know, are already established or something. And that kind of comes across as either rude or opportunistic or, you know, like that sort of stuff. Just, you know, like, don't worry about those people.
Yeah.
You know?
I think in like niche communities, it's very, like, because they're quite so often very small. The idea of like celebrity is like kind of warped there.
Yeah.
Like I was really like some of my earliest like experiences with the writing community was with a friend of mine, Stacey, who like it was a really good space to kind of experience to enter like a sort of or become involved with the writing community, because like Stacey would never kind of would treat everybody as friends as the same, and I would kind of, as this like young new kid, like 20 years old, I would go to like events and be like, oh my god, like I read that person's poetry on like this like, you know, throwaway website, but like I think they're the coolest person in the world. And if it wasn't for like, I think Stacey kind of you know, tone it down, Rory, I would probably have come off a bit too over enthusiastic. And it's interesting you mentioned, you know, that idea of making friends and talking to other people to kind of like learn and get better at your work. But like, do you also enjoy it like as a you know, fun social thing?
Being friends with people, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, like I don't know, I just thought I'd like wanted to kind of flag that, like you know, you don't have to like involve yourself in a community to like improve your, you know, improve your writing or improve your coding skills. Like you can just be there to make friends with others.
Yeah, totally. I think look, I'm a very social person, and I just love to be somewhere and talk to people and talk loudly and stuff and laugh and, you know, like that sort of stuff. But also on the note of like, you know, fawning over people's work or whatever, you know, like I think like this is probably something that a lot of people said also, but like you gotta, like, if you're new to something and you have like peers that are same starting point, same skill level, maybe like everyone in the Toolkits program this year, look at each other, and then you're gonna be like, in a few years you'll see you're gonna be falling over your friends' work, and that's the best feeling, because you kind of like support your friends. Like this is really like, it begins there. Like you gotta bat for your friends, or else no one else is gonna do it. I mean, everyone, I mean, they will, but like you gotta be there. Like I think it's a really important aspect of like being in a community is like lift up your peers, like your friends and stuff, not just people who are already popular, because they're fine. Like, you know, like they're fine, they'll be fine. Your friends though, your friends, look out for them. You know, I think that that's like always going to be like the important aspect of it, is that you got to help each other and you got to lift each other, and you're like, and that's where true community starts, I think. And this is like kind of unrelated. No, it is related. It's related now. The first internet friends that I made, pretty much meaningful friendships that I made, are on Tumblr, and these are people that I just met through like common interests. We were all teenagers. We were like we're not like meeting as creators or whatever. It's just like literally we were similar people in an internet space. I moved to Melbourne because this was where like a lot of my Tumblr friends were. I come from Europe originally. I was very lonely in Europe. I hated it. I moved here and then like it kind of clicked that like, oh, actually like all these people that I knew from Tumblr they live here, they're all doing really cool stuff. And like so you already have these existing like connections that you have. Just see what people are doing. Like you know, like I mean, like, you know, be curious about like what everyone's up to, and if someone's work that you already know is interesting, just like talk to them. Be like, hey, I love your work. Hey, I love what you're doing. Let's chat about it or whatever. Or like be like on social media, be like, I love this. My friend's work is great. That's what I do all the time. I love it.
Yeah. That's so good. I think like the people who are starting out with you now are like going to be the people who in a few years' time are making, like you said, making the work that you're like the most and you're the most impressed with. So like that's so important to be there for them. We're almost out of time. Thank you so much, Cecile, for coming and chatting with me. In 2 weeks' time, there'll be another Toolkits live session for digital storytelling, pitching and publishing digital writing with Hannah Jenkins. So tune in for that. There is one question about some good resources or games for newbies interested in starting game design to check out. Sign up to the VoiceWorks online writing jam, because we can share some resources with you, and maybe follow Cecile on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
It's forever. It's actually like here.
It's there.
Cool. Yeah. So if anyone has questions on Bitsy, you can pop them in the Discord, but you can also pop them in my You can @ me with whatever. Just message me, whatever. Like, I'm happy to help anyone with problems in Bitsy, as long as I have the skills to tend to that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Cecile. I really appreciate your time. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll